Hey geeks, welcome to another exciting episode of Rockin The Code World with dotNetDave. I'm David McCarter. I'm glad you're back. We had a week off and I'm glad I'm back because I miss you all. I really enjoy doing the show and I hope you enjoy the show. And if you do enjoy the show, please send me some email and tell me how you like it. And also, if you have any suggestions for the show, including guests you want me to invite, I'm pretty booked up until May, but I'm always willing to invite anybody you guys want to have on here, except for the CEO of Microsoft and Scott Guthrie, because there's no way I could get them. So, okay. I'm glad you're all here. I hope at least everybody in America is being safe from the storms we've been having this week. We had a pretty bad storm here in San Diego, and a worse one is supposed to hit tomorrow. So buckle up, everybody else in America. It's going to be a tough week. So my guest today, I'm really happy to have Jared Parsons back on the show. This is the second time on the show. Principal software engineering lead at Microsoft, who just celebrated his 20th year at Microsoft. That's pretty cool to stay at a tech company for 20 years. So we'll talk to him about that. We'll talk to him about a bunch of other things I have on the schedule to talk about. We won't run out of things to talk about. So if you have any questions for Jared, start posting them now so we can get them answered, because it usually takes a couple minutes for it to come in through the feed and everything. Okay. Show's 96. Oh, yeah, 96. Well, our 100th show will be in April. I don't have anything special planned for that show, but we'll see. Maybe I'll think of something. I want to promote my new book, David McCarter, Coding Standards for Microsoft.NET. Here's my proof copy. I still don't have the real copy in because I thought I ordered it and I didn't, and so I'm waiting for it to come in. And this week also, I made a hardcover copy. You know, I don't know how many hardcover tech books you have, but I did a hardcover. I just want to see what it's going to come out like. So it's on its way right now. So maybe the next show I'll have it here for you to check out. But, you know, I worked a long time last year on this book. It's chock full of coding standards that I've been using at .NET ever since it came out. And it helps me write better quality code. And of course, because I'm really big into performance, there's tons of performance tips in there too. So I hope you go pick up a copy. If you don't have coding standards at work, this will really jumpstart your team. If you do, this will supplement your coding standards because, all the teams that I've joined in the last 10 years, they have very, 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 if they have coding standards at all, they have very little. And so this book is 560 pages, and so it's very comprehensive. So I hope you pick up a copy. All right, I want to invite Jared onto the show. Jared is the C Sharp compiler lead. He's been working with Microsoft for 20 years now, pretty much all of that either in the .NET team or on .NET tooling. Besides compilers, he's got a strong passion for infrastructure and legacy code bases. Welcome, Jared.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. It's going great.
Looks like you're having nice weather up there.
Yeah, so I live in the Seattle area, and we are just getting out from under about like 10 days of straight kind of like rain and downpours, and it's going to be pretty nice out the next few days. Looking forward to enjoying a pretty nice bike ride tomorrow afternoon and get out in the weather. So
yeah, and before the next storm comes, right?
Yeah, it's going to be, Seattle's pretty dreary usually from about September to May.
Yeah, I know. So it's nice to see the sun is out.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yesterday it actually got so bright in my office. On Thursday it got so bright in my office. I was like, I have to go turn the shades down. This is kind of weird for the kind of winter season.
Yeah. Especially in Seattle, right?
Yeah.
So, how have you been? How have you been since you haven't been on the show for like 2.5 years, and so there's a lot of stuff we can catch up with. Like I said, everybody, post your questions now, or I'm just going to ask Jared the questions I have. So, and we can talk about stuff like the C# compiler, what's been going on in C# at .NET 8, and .NET 9, and the language design process. So if you have any questions around that, please start posting your questions now. But I have, since you were, I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse, but I'll tell it to you anyway. It's something I was working on this week because something broken. I'm converting my open source projects to .NET 8. I'm working real hard to get those out. And I discovered that part of one method that I had stopped working. And so I created this method a while ago because in .NET, using the type object, right, we can get all kinds of information about a type, right? Whether it's a reference type or a value type or, all those kind of things. But I needed a way to determine if a type is a record type. And so the original code, which is still in the older project, looks at the string toString, and if it's got a compiler some kind of attribute on it, then I say, oh, this is a record type. Well, when I overrode that doesn't work anymore. So I changed it to the hash code, which I assume will have the same issue. So, and I've asked Microsoft this before, but can you put in the type object if it's a record type?
Potentially we could. So this is something that we get asked. So records is something we added a few releases ago into C#. And we, a frequent point of feedback we got, because the way the C# compiler works is, I often tell people, it's like the C# compiler, like csc.exe. I was like, it's a very boring thing. It's 1,000 lines of code, and most of that's talking to the server. That what the compiler team really focuses on is our libraries and APIs around providing semantic information, syntax trees, and basically allowing people to write inspection tools on top of C#.
Yeah.
And one of the things we got a lot of feedback on was, even at at kind of like our symbol level, is we want to know if this is a record. We want to know if this is a record, look at symbols, and we want to know if it's a record kind of down at the reflection and type level. And the thing that we usually tell people is, we kind of kept pushing back on people. It's like, why do you want to know if it's a record? Like, what are you going to do differently about it? Because records are, in a lot of ways, just kind of C# syntactic sugar on top of structs or classes. And we kept asking people, it's like, why do you think you need to treat records differently? Because we were we were really concerned that if we gave people an API that said, hey, this is a record, they would start making assumptions about how that type should be used. And as you just mentioned, like records do have a lot of base behaviors. They have implicit toStrings, they have withers and whatever, but most of that can be overridden.
Right.
And we were worried that when people start really looking at, if they start looking at record, they were going to start making too many assumptions. And we kept pushing back, like, what do you need to know? What do you need to know? And when we really dug deep on a lot of customers, what we found out was it's like, actually, you all, if we gave you record, it would cause you to start going down this path where you were making assumptions about how the types work. And so we were pulling back saying, don't treat it that way. Just look at it like a normal type. The one thing you can look for to identify record, though, is the withers. There's a method that we put in there, it's a generated method on the type.
What's it called?
So it's compiler generated. So I'm not sure if we have I can't remember, we encode the name in a special way. But if you look at
I'll look at it.
When you do records, you do like a with properties. The way that's implemented, we effectively kind of have to have a virtual constructor because records can be hierarchical. And so that the with method serves as a bit of our virtual constructor. And that's one thing that's fairly unique to record types. So
I'll tell you why I want it. So I have a specific reason for this. And the reason is, I have a code performance book out, right? And I'm working really hard right now to get all of that updated to .NET 8 right now. It's still going to take me a while, but I've been working like almost every day on it. And so one of the things that I wanted to do because of the book, all the work I've been doing on the book, I've discovered that, record types, value types, and reference types operate differently in collections, right? The performance is actually very different on all three types. And so I wanted to make, so developers didn't have to worry about it in my open source project. I wanted to create, which I already have, some common methods to loop, through collections in the most efficient way that I can figure out and everything. But I need to know if it's a record type because record types do perform differently when you're looping through them. And so that's the reason why I want it, right? It's not something I will die if I don't have it, but it sure would be nice to have a method where I could just throw any collection type at it, and the method decides which way is the most performant way to loop through it, right? Because dictionaries work different, all the types work differently when you're looping through them, and so or when getting a count or things like that. And so that's why I want it. So yeah. So maybe I'm the only one that wants it for that purpose, but that's why. But I'll look into this method and see. I looked with Reflector the other day, and that's when I came up with the hash code thing. But I'll look at the I'll look at the IL some more and see what I can find out. But thank you for that. So let's talk about your 20 years of Microsoft.
Yes.
So how did you want to work at Microsoft?
I ended up working at Microsoft because I was working for a professor as an undergrad student, and she had a pretty good relationship with Microsoft. It was Dr. Amy Bruckman, and I remember she apparently had asked, I believe the way it worked was she had said, hey, I want to get a new undergrad to help me out with one of these projects, and Microsoft was one of the companies that helped fund some of her work, and they were like, okay, yeah, we're gonna help fund some of your projects and give for an undergrad work here, but we really want them to use this new thing called C#. And so I was effectively like hired under her, and they're like, you're going to use this new thing called C#. I'm like, what is that? Like at the time I was a huge C and Java person. That was kind of my bread and butter. And they're like, no, you're going to learn this. You're going to use C++. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And they're like, and C#. I'm like, what? And so I had to get, I got a nice book on C# and started learning that. But then eventually through her, I ended up interning at Microsoft. And then from there, moved into a full-time position. So I interned in the summer of 2003 and joined as a full-time in January of 2004.
Oh yeah. So you started your career when .NET started. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, my internship at Microsoft was amazing because I was interning effectively between .NET 1 and .NET 2. And so I got to see during the summer I was there, generics,
Yeah.
delegates. I got to
Yeah.
see all this cool stuff, which because .NET 2 was a big revolution, like a
It's
huge advance over
a
.NET
huge
1.
advancement. Right.
And I got to
Yeah.
see all of this cool stuff when I was an intern and play with it all. And then I went back to school for 6 months. I'm like, and I can't touch any of it now. And so I had to go back, and it's like I had to go back to my went to
Java
like
and
no,
yeah.
I went back to working for my professor again, and it's
Oh,
like,
oh,
and
oh.
I'm using C# again. I'm like, and I can't use any of the stuff that I was like using it,
Oh, it's
working a
cool.
few minutes.
Oh, oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
it didn't get released for a few more years, and so it was a big like disappointment for me. But then I went back in January and got to play with all the fun stuff again.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. And how you started at Microsoft. And so, while you were sharing that, I was thinking, you know, developers typically don't stay at a software company 20 years. So why have you stayed at Microsoft for
Uh,
20 years?
Uh, I tell people it's like I like to think that I've had about, and this is something I tell people about in general if they're thinking about working at Microsoft. Like Microsoft is a huge company, and it was a big company when I joined it. It's much bigger now.
Yeah.
And I tell people it's like I've been here 20 years, but in that 20 years, I've had about 5 different jobs in there. When I first joined Microsoft, I joined what was called like a team architect part of Visual Studio. It was kind of back when we had SKUs of Visual Studio, and it was kind of
Mm-hmm.
one of the enterprise level things. I worked on team architect, team test for a few years, and that was kind of one job. Then I moved in and worked on like the Visual Basic compiler for a year or two.
Mm.
And then I moved over and started working on the other parts of the Visual Basic and overall .NET languages experience for another few years. And then I actually went and worked at Midori for 5 years. And Midori was a huge experiment on basically how can we take managed code and build an operating system out of managed code and kind of all the way from soup to nuts and
Mm-hmm.
operating kernel all the way up to like userland and up to like all kinds of fun UI and web browser stuff. And I ended up doing a lot of we effectively started our base language was C#, and we basically we kind of evolved C# to be more kind of a systems level language. And we did a whole bunch of kind of experiments. We did a lot of the initial await async prototyping. A lot of the C# team had kind of come up with async and await. Then we took it to Midori, played with a lot, and came back to them and said, like, hey, we found a lot more efficient ways to the way you guys are doing code gen. Like, we played with it, and like this code gen is going to be like a lot more efficient in terms of how like the state machines can work.
Mm-hmm.
It's where span-of-T originated from. Like a lot of our work at Midori, we did span-of-T. And then eventually, after Midori kind of finished off after about 5 years, I moved back to the .NET team proper. And I was working on the C# compiler for a little bit, and I took over lead after about 6 months, and I've been the C# compiler lead for about the last 7 years or so.
Hmm. Do you work for Richard or?
Rich Landard.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Rich and I, he's on the PM team. Him and I used to
Oh,
when we moved into kind of team rooms in the .NET team. I want to say like 6 years ago, 6 years ago. But before COVID, we kind of in each of our team rooms we had kind of like desks in sets of 4. So you have
yeah.
2 people on 2 sides. So Rich Lander and I were eye to eye for a year. Like I could look over my desk and be like, "Hi, Rich, what's going on?" And Rich was always great because Rich is always working on all kinds of IoT stuff at the time, and his desk was just filled with all these little fun toys. And it was really great for me because I always forget. I have a couple little tools, and I would always forget like my phone charge or something else. I'm like, I just reach around and just steal from Rich, plug all my stuff in.
Yeah. I I I remember spending like half a day in one of your team rooms once, and not long after you guys started doing that, and I thought that was a really cool way to set up a working environment. Do you guys and I thought it was cool that even Satya does the same thing, right? It wasn't like I think that's cool that everybody does the same thing. It's not, the executives get their own special bath, stuff. And I know they're in a special building and everything, but so do you guys still use team rooms?
Yep, we still use team rooms. we're coming back from COVID. It's trying to figure out what our hybrid experience is. It's a very evolving thing because some people are getting more and more. It's like we're getting to the point where now everyone who's kind of more comfortable with coming back into the office has started to, and people are just kind of adapting to what is life going to be like when, some of our team is remote, some of our team is local, some people are coming in a few days a week, and I'd say we still haven't really gotten to kind of what I would think is going to be the settling point. Like particularly on like the compiler team, I think we have fairly established now like which part of the compiler team is going to be in the office, which part is not. But we're also getting back to like we've been working with the team even like in the last month. It's like, okay, you're going to be in the office. What days will you be in the office? Because then I'll come in the office on those days. So then I'll move our one-on-ones over there so we can start like kind of have more team stuff. But we're just really kind of honestly starting to get back in the swing of like how do we go to lunch together, and so how do we figure out this kind of like hybrid world where on certain days, certain people here and certain people are not. So we're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me. My friend, one of my friends here in San Diego, started. He came up with mob programming, and now he goes all over the place teaching it. And one of the things that I like about mob programming, not that I've ever done it, but the idea of it is the same kind of idea that you guys have in your team rooms where, most of the stakeholders, whatever you're doing, is in the same place, right? And that way you don't have to wait for a meeting. You don't have to wait for emails. You don't have to wait all this time. It just, slow down the entire process, right? You have people there that can make the decision, right?
Yeah. I think it is, even when the team room environment, people's personalities can be so much fun for me.
Yeah.
Like I used to sit like next to Jan Kodas, who was kind of one of the partner architects of the runtime. And I would have like emailed him something, and then he would email me back, and then we'd be emailing, like literally we're sitting next to each other, having a conversation on email. And I just like looked Jan, like, we could just talk. Like, why don't we just like, we've like kicked everyone else off the email thread, and him and I are like back and forthing on like a particular like thing. I'm like, we could talk.
I've told people that. I've gotten up and told people, I'm right next to you, right? Why are you texting me?
Yeah. And it's just like in the moment you're emailing, and then you take everyone else and you're talking, and then you're like, wait a minute, what like this? What we're sitting next to each other. What are we doing?
Yeah, I know.
Let's just talk.
Well, I see people doing that like when they're out in public, right? They're like a couple at the dinner table. They're texting each other. And what?
Yeah.
What have we come to that the only way we can communicate is through text now? Well, that's a cool story about, why you're there and how you got there and why you've stayed there. So what is your plan, to stay at Microsoft for your whole career, or?
I don't know.
I should have asked you that on the live show.
No, I tell people I often try to take my career in kind of like phases, and like I tell people I often have like, if you kind of look historically at how me personally have gone, like I end up having like 3 to 5 year stints in places, and then I kind of like have a little thing and then pivot a little bit to a slightly different area. But I really haven't ever gone that far. I've been pretty much in .NET tooling for last 17 years in one form or another. Even when I was on Midori, it was all hacking the C# compiler and then meeting a lot of times with the .NET team to talk to them about like the things we discovered, what was working, what wasn't working. So I don't know. Definitely right now I'm having fun and don't have any plans to go anywhere. So,
and if you don't want to answer this, that's okay. But have most of the moves been because you wanted to, or is because they were reshuffling you to another place, or both?
Little early in career, 1 or 2 of the moves were like more of the, we need someone to solve this problem, and we decided that you're the best person to solve this problem. Later in my career, it's been much more like had a lot more control. Generally, like we try to make sure that people are comfortable with the roles they're assigned to and where they're going. But early in career, there's a little bit more of, Jared, we really need someone to solve this problem. And we think that you're the person who can actually solve it. So like, here you go. You're now going to be working on this one. All right, here we go.
Yeah, and that's that's kind of how things work when you're in your early career. That reminds me of a story that I've told and written about a few times where, we had this. I was in charge of hiring interviewing all the developers, coming into this company for the whole time I was there, and I hired this beginner guy, and and he was a beginner, and he was wicked smart, straight out of a CS degree, and we hired him. The first thing we wanted him to do was something none of us wanted to do, because it was too freaking hard, right? And so we were going, we can't figure this out. Let's give it to the new guy, right? And he figured it out, right? And he was brilliant. And I tell this in my story, is once he discovered he was brilliant, he left to another company. But but that's okay. It was, the whole point was, we kind of stuck him on stuff that we didn't want to do, and that's what the new people do, right? Is there something you want to talk about, or do you want me to just ask you some more questions?
Either way you want to do it, I'm happy to talk about time there, compiler. I mean, if you want a good topic, I'd probably tell you about like the all the fun of shipping the C# compiler.
Yeah. I think I have a. Yeah. Let's talk about shipping the C# compiler. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that's something as like the lead, and just kind of also my personality on what I tend to care about in software engineering as a profession is like. Shipping the C# compiler is the thing that like I spend the most time kind of working on, because there are a number of like very real challenges that we face with it. And like the first one is like we have lots, like millions of customers.
Yeah.
And these customers, we have a very big range of like what do our customers care about. And we have everything from like people listening to this show, or people who I tend to interact with on Twitter and Discord, things like that, who are very much like, I want all the new stuff. I want to see like, what's the latest stuff you're doing? I want to play with it. I want to use all the cool new things. I want to move forward. I want to be reading all the blogs. And then we have kind of the other spectrum of our customer, which I call like the kind of the institutions who are like, we are afraid of breaking anything.
Yeah.
Like we have huge code bases, change is scary. And what we want to be able to do is that particular customer, like they have their kind of mentality is we want to be upgrading, like getting new Visual Studios, when we're getting new .NET SDKs, we want to be taking them as regularly as possible with the minimal amount of disruption.
Yeah.
And like one set of customers that, the more kind of like, I want to play with new things, they can be very happy with changes to the language or changes to the framework, whereas the other customer is extremely allergic to them. And they both are very, like, they're both our customers and we love them both, but we have to keep them both happy.
Yeah.
And C# over 20 years is like, has a ton of features, a ton of kind of different concerns that we have. And so we have an enormous amount of kind of infrastructure in our testing to make sure that we can keep all of these customers happy. Yeah. The one thing I often tell my team, and I tell people when I talk about like what does a C# compiler do, is our number one feature is compatibility. Like that is the number one thing that we deliver to customers, because that is something that is universal amongst all our customers, is keeping them happy, is making sure that when you get a new C# compiler, you can keep building your code the way you want to build it until you make a decision on how to move forward with it.
Yeah.
And for testing, we have kind of a fairly advanced infrastructure for it at this point. So if you look, we invest a ton in kind of our GitHub PR system. And so that is kind of our first line of defense against it. And our GitHub PR system, we do a number of different things. We have one, we basically do bootstrap compiling. So we build the C# compiler, and then we rebuild the entire C# infrastructure with that compiler and make sure that on every single change, like we can actually continue to produce a C# compiler that can build the C# compiler.
Yeah.
And the IDE and the debugging, the infrastructure. We run about 750,000 tests on every PR, somewhere in that kind of range.
Wow.
Yeah. Testing is actually a fun one, because I think that if you look at if you took the code base, looked at it and said like, how many like facts are there, like conditional facts in our code base? I think we have about somewhere around 140, 150,000. Just like raw tests, not including like theories and things like that. But C# ships on a number of different platforms. We have to run on .NET Framework, .NET Core. We have still Mono and WASM cases. Then we have architecture. So we have x86, AMD 64, ARM64. We have debug. We have release, Windows, Linux, Mac. And you, if you kind of explode that matrix out, you end up with somewhere we can have several million tests running in an EPR if we wanted to. But we have found the sweet spot is about closer to about this range where we hit a couple of the high points in those test matrices. And so that is kind of like our baseline defense against like regressions and shipping, is just getting through the gauntlet of our code reviews, getting through our base test systems. But even from there, kind of I say it's like that's layer one of how we ship and ensure quality. Layer two is actually once our code gets merged into GitHub, a couple of things start happening in the background. Mm-hmm. The first is we start inserting into Visual Studio. So the C# compiler, the Roslyn repo has like the C# compiler, the C# IDE, our debugging, ENC, our VS Code experience. It's all there. And we are constantly pushing new bits into Visual Studio. And one of the things we do in terms of the compiler is whenever we push into Visual Studio, we push a new C# compiler that is used to build Visual Studio. And so about 4 or 5 times a day, we rebuild all of Visual Studio with like the latest code that we have produced on GitHub. And that is an amazing source of regression testing.
Yeah, I bet.
Because the Visual Studio has been using C# for pretty much 20 years now.
Yeah.
And if you actually kind of go and look at Visual Studio, you can almost see different eras of C# in there. Like there's like we know there's one big part of the code base we know in Visual Studio uses a bunch of unsafe from like era 2. We know part of the code is like pre-generic. We know there's part of code over here that was very invested in like some dynamic infrastructure. And so we get this fascinating like array of code, like old eras of C# to keep compiling against. And one of the jokes I have in the compiler team is you haven't really become a member of the C# compiler team until you can make a change that passes everything in GitHub, gets through our code reviews, and then breaks the Visual Studio build. Like that is when you have joined the C# compiler team for real. And we in our stand-up, we have a little like celebration that you have finally like broken the Visual Studio build. Like congratulations, you have done an impressive enough change to like get through that gauntlet, but then break Visual Studio. So we have a little mini celebration in our stand-up team when you can actually do that. Even our veterans, when they do it, we celebrate it.
Well, Visual Studio is kind of a Frankenstein, right? It's
Visual Studio is an it is a product that has been evolving. Like the Visual Studio we know today has evolved from like Visual InterDev and like Visual Studio C++. It is kind of an amalgamation of those products and a couple of other things. So the history of that code is just deep. I remember when I first started, I would kind of like dig through parts of the code. I could actually find some of the references to like Visual InterDev, like all these old products in there. But it's developed by lots of engineers over 20 years. It has lots of different emphasis. Like there's the SQL integration, there's like, old web integration. And so it is an enormous product. And it is one of kind of our biggest, like, we feel good about like when we give a compiler to customers, it's like we have built Visual Studio, so we feel like we're giving you a good product.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I really love about Microsoft and DevDiv in particular is we have a very, very strong dog fooding culture. And so the fact that it's okay for me to change the C# compiler they're using a few times a day in order to like make the product better, it's like that's kind of par for the course and people understand that. And if it does cause a disruption every now and then, it's like we just kind of accept that as like this is how we love our customers. We love our customers by using our products and making sure they're quality. And then after that, we end up the entire like .NET SDK within about 2 weeks of a change checking in. We've pretty much built the compiler, starts slowly moving around the GitHub repos, and we will have built the entire like .NET SDK within about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on where we are in the cycle. And so that's kind of just how we base ensure quality in the compiler. The other thing we do is we want customers to start using our features very soon, because when we're developing a C# feature, I'd say that there are some C# features when we do them, it's more of like we know how this is going to look and we know how this is going to work. And the feedback we need from customers is, did we do it correctly? There are other features we get into language design and we're just like, we don't know what the right answer to this question is, because the customer is the one who's going to tell us what the right answer to this question is. And how do we get the customers involved? And so one of the things we started doing about 5 years ago, if you go back a little more than 5 years, if you ask the C# team, like, well, I want to try that feature out, how do I do it? We have some really arcane instructions on, like, well, if you install this random thing from this website, it'll break your Visual Studio install, but you can use like a new C# compiler feature, or you can like code in Vim, but not Visual Studio. But about 5 years ago, we really kind of worked out this system where we effectively now have, so like right now, .NET 8 has just released, and we're kind of starting .NET 9. Very soon, and about probably by at least 17.10, which will come out, I think, sometime in the spring, we will have .NET 9, C# 13 features checked into Visual Studio, and they're just all turned off by default, and you can't get to them. And we tell customers, like, hey, if you want to give us feedback, you can go into your project file and change the language version to what we call preview. Oh. And we change to the preview. Now, suddenly, all these C# features just start lighting up in Visual Studio. Wow. All the things we're going to ship, we put them in there. You can use them. You can give us feedback on them, and you can help us get them to quality before we actually lock them down for RTM. Yeah. And so that's something that has been enormously successful for us. We did an enormous amount of, it allowed us to get tons of feedback when we did nullable reference types. We had that checked in very early under preview. It allowed us to get a lot of feedback on some of the primary constructor work we did. Some of when we were experimenting with changes to the ref safety rules, like it was very valuable for a lot of customers who were dogfooding that, getting back to us. And particularly like when we did minimal APIs, it was really important for us to use that feature because I don't think one thing people appreciate. So are you familiar with the minimal APIs in ASP.NET Core? So part of doing that work in order to making that successful was we had to change overload resolution rules, and we had to change how Lambda inference worked in the compiler. Those are two of the scariest things for us to do. Overload resolution is easily the most complex process in the C# compiler when you factor in type inference and how lambdas work. And when we go into a C# release saying, hey, we're going to change overload resolution, type inference, and lambdas together, is quite easily the scariest thing that we can do. And we knew it was eventually going to make a better product, and the proof of that was how successful minimal APIs was going to be. We knew how pretty we could make minimal APIs. We knew we could make that all work, but we knew there was a long road getting us from here to there. And so it was one of those things that when we were kind of scheduling our release, we did that feature very early in the .NET 7 release. We put it out in preview, and then we were basically begging customers, like, turn on preview and tell us what breaks. And we ended up getting a lot of feedback from customers saying, hey, like, it broke me in this very strange way. And we found out, one thing we always find is customers are infinitely more creative than we give them credit for. And they sent us all these great samples from VS Feedback, and they're like, hey, if I turn this on preview, this breaks, but if I take it out of preview, it like goes back to the way I expected it to work. And it's like, perfect, like this is the feedback we need. And it really let us get from a starting point where we said, hey, we want to do these big changes, to where we got to a number of customer cases, and we've really broken it down, like kind of the last language design meeting we had. We're like, here are the 7 breaks that we have and how like this kind of system does. 5 of them we think are super beneficial, and like most customers would just agree with us that this is the right way. 2 of them we found to be like super negative with customers and causing too much friction, and like how can we mitigate these breaks while keeping these other 5 things super like beneficial. And so it's been a very successful it was a very successful undertaking. It took us a lot of convincing of upper management when we started this, because we're like, hey, we're going to put preview code into the RTM product. And that was this is when we first started having these conversations. It was like 6-7 years ago. And like I said, that was something that management was like, what do you want to do that? And we kind of, we slowed it. We basically said, let us do one feature. We're going to do one feature this way, and we're going to show you how successful it is, and how we because they had a big fear of by putting kind of like a beta feature into the product, you will disrupt the RTM features. You will inadvertently reduce the quality over here. And we kind of slowly put features in and prove to management that we could maintain that balance, but we could get super valuable feedback. And once we kind of showed management we could do that, they kind of bought into it and said, yep, all right, let's go. And we've been doing that ever since, and we've been very, very happy with the results.
Well, it must be working because, I have to hand it to you. And I've been working with Microsoft my whole career, and there's been lots of ups and downs. But I would have to say that, the especially since Core has come out, the amount of breaking changes that I find are so little, and sometimes none, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say most of my problems are with NuGet packages, right? It's
No.
not even the compiler, or it's not even C Sharp or anything. It's NuGet, and but I have to say, I'm very impressed, and I hope that this show. I hope some companies, especially the companies that don't like to change, watch this show because, you know, I don't think they should be so afraid, right? And because when I go working, these consulting gigs, and I go into these companies, they are so far behind, because of what you're talking about. They're scared, and
Yeah.
and I don't blame them, especially with the pre Microsoft kind of way of doing things, and but now I don't feel they have a lot of justification for that, right? Especially if they have somebody on their team that really understands all of this,
No.
that can help them guide them, into the new language. And, in December, I had Olia Garvish on, and, she was showing the new .NET upgrade tooling. And I was pretty impressed with that too, because that's another thing I think that companies really would need to look at to understand if they can upgrade and to make the upgrade easier to a new version, right?
Yeah.
And I know that tool will be hard to get off the ground because typically in Microsoft the upgrade wizards have never been that great, and but what she was showing me is pretty impressive, and so I hope that things like that and all the work that you guys are doing are going to allow these companies to at least keep almost up to date with .NET, right?
Yeah, and it's very beneficial. Like we are. I'm trying to think of the right word. It's like we are highly incentivized to have customers keep moving forward because, like, we have security fixes that go into the runtime, and like you're not at some point you're not getting that in older SDKs. It's like we need you on newer SDKs so you can get these new fixes, these new runtimes, and so we have a lot of incentive in trying to make it easy for customers to move forward. And I'll say it's not even just like external customers who are afraid of this. Like even internal customers do have like hesitation on how to move forward because they've been broken in the past. I had like one particular conversation where a PM was having a real hard time convincing an internal customer to move forward. And they're like, "Look, if I let you talk to the C# compiler lead, would that make you feel better?" And literally, they were like, email wasn't cut it. They're like, "We want you to come and talk to us in person." I was like, "Okay." And like even that time, I was like, "Listen," I was like, do you guys have a good infrastructure for test or whatever?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're pretty good. We feel good about our testing." And I'm like, "Tell you what, I'm going to be our meetings in like 2 hours, right?" I was like, "Why don't you just put the new C# compiler in your test queue? I'll be there in 2 hours, and then we can talk about what you find."
Yeah.
And by the time I got there, I was like, "So, like, what'd you find?" And they were like everything passed. And you want to go get some? You want to go get a drink? You want to go get one? Like it went from this meeting where I was going to talk to them, and they're like, "You're right. Actually, everything just passed. So, you want some Snickers? You want to go get some lunch somewhere?" And so it was a really fun experience for me because it was like, it's good validation that we're doing like the right things. But I mean, upgrades can be tricky. I mean, within the parts that we have control over within like the .NET sphere, like the .NET SDK, our core packages, we do put a lot of emphasis in trying to keep that compatible release to release to make it easy for customers to upgrade. But there are some breaking changes out there outside of that. And particularly when you move to a new .NET runtime, we do say that like moving from like .NET X to X+1, we will put in some amount of breaking changes that are necessary to kind of keep the platform evolving. And I will tell you, the C# compiler usually feels the brunt of those changes. We have an enormous test base, and we test things very down to the minute detail. And very often the runtime team has like done things. They're like, "Oh yeah, we moved exceptions and IO from till later in the process and not earlier." I'm like, "Yeah, we broke all of our tests. All of our tests knew that if like the exception should be happening here, not there." So we've had a lot of fun throwing paper wads at them when they do things like that.
Well, I'm glad, like I said, I'm really glad you guys, this is super important to you all. And not only is it important, but I think you're doing a great job at it. So, and like I said, I hope that more companies understand that because one of the things that I want companies to upgrade for is at least for the performance, because between every major release of .NET, right, the even numbers, right, you guys do a dramatic change in performance. .NET 8 is another dramatic change in performance, just like .NET 6 was, and that performance equals less cost, right? If you can get that into the code base with most of the time not doing any changes except for changing the version number, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's honestly one of our bigger selling points and internal motivations now, because lots of Azure and lots of Microsoft run on .NET. And one of the ways, we kind of like, people add me like, what value do you add to the company type, considerations. It's like, well, release after release, .NET saves the company like a ton of money because these big Azure services can, even like these tiny improvements, when you scale it up to those massive services, like millions of dollars of differences, like it's like huge. And so those are, and most of the time it is just, sometimes it's like opting into new libraries, but as you said, a lot of our performance improvement is just moving that number forward. Recently, I was really inspired. Stephen Tobe, who is
he's been on the show.
Yeah, and he does his annual performance blog that crashes your browser.
Yeah, I know. He writes a book and an article, right?
Right. And I was really inspired. Recently, I saw him give a talk, and his talk was basically the gist of his talk was just like moving forward will save you perf, like, and you don't have to do anything. Yeah. And I actually was kind of curious. I was like, I wonder what the C# compiler like perf would be versus framework and core. And some people might be kind of curious, like, what, you just don't know that offhand? You're the lead. And it's like, actually, if you really get down to how C# works and how kind of our ecosystem and tooling works, our incentives for performance is actually much more for Visual Studio. So the C# compiler, as I mentioned earlier, is an API. And when you're in Visual Studio, like that API is what gives you IntelliSense, syntax highlighting, find all refs. It's this like API that the entire IDE is built on top of. Well, Visual Studio it's very important for that to be very fast typing, very fast responsiveness. Right. And we have lots of profile on that, lots of customers pushing on it. And we have huge incentive to make that as fast as possible. But Visual Studio is a .NET Framework process. So all of our kind of perf incentives, and this is changing these days, but for the longest time has been like make .NET Framework and make Visual Studio fast. Contrarily, if you go and look at like build, like how does like build work? The C# compiler is actually, and all the things that happen in build is actually a very efficient process. And when we make it even faster, it really doesn't change build throughput proportionally. Like if you make the compiler 20% faster, build throughput only increases like 1% or 2%. Because of all the other things that happen around compilation with copying files, NuGet restore, and things like that. Right. And so a lot of our incentive is in .NET Framework. And so so as part of that, we don't do a whole lot of just like how fast is like the raw compiler on like .NET Core versus Framework. I knew anecdotally that it was faster because we had a lot of measurements from like Windows Build Lab and things like that. But also it means when we say like testing the performance of the compiler and Framework versus Core is a very pure test, because we don't have a lot of like .NET Core specialization in the compiler. We don't have like if .NET Core app, like use this cool new API or use that. Like we have like a tiny bit of that, but we've never really sat down and said, let's go optimize this crazily for .NET Core. But even just like taking a raw benchmark of the compiler using benchmark.net, it's almost 50% faster on .NET Core. Yeah. It is just like I sent the numbers around, and it was one of those people are like, did you measure correctly? Have you done this correctly? I remember even like the very first time, like I said, the Windows Build Lab has amazing data on like, it's one of my favorite build labs to work with, because when they have a problem, we are never lacking for data to figure out like what happened. Like they have the first time when they moved from like using like a framework compiler to a core compiler, they were kind of worried about what would the perf be. And they came back and they're like, oh yeah, this compiler is like 20% faster. I'm like, I was like, you measured wrong. I was like, because they went from having in their old setup, they had like an engine compiler on framework that was like highly set up. and they were just doing basically into more or less .NET exec the DLL with no cross-genning, no nothing. I'm like, you measured wrong. It's not 20% faster. And I had one of our perf architects go tell them what they were measuring wrong, and he came back and he was like, no, dude, they're right. That's how much faster it is now. And it's like, we haven't measured it in a while. It's just like, oh my God, it's amazing.
Yeah. And, going back to performance, talking about performance a little bit and saving money. And this is one of the, this is the, when I usually join a consulting gig, this is one of the things I kind of tell them. And I don't tell them the story, but, the perf will save you money, right? Especially if you're moving to the cloud or you want to move to the cloud, right? Worrying about perf and that why I have a book is, all because of that. But so this young woman that I mentor, she's right now finishing up her CS degree that her master's degree that I helped her get into. And somehow we got on a discussion once and we were talking about how some people straight out of CS degrees are getting paid $250,000 a year at Facebook. And so one of her friends, this happened to one of her friends, and she told me why. And it was because of perf, because if Facebook feels if they can hire this person for $250,000 a year, but that person saves Facebook millions of dollars a year, it's totally worth it, right? I don't think anybody out of CS degree should, straight out of college should get $250,000 a year because that can cause problems too. But it's a valid point that, we have to worry about these kind of things. And it is important if you're just getting a little bit of performance out of one method, but that if you do that millions of times a day, it adds up, right?
Yeah.
And
and I'll tell you how dramatic those numbers can be in changing how companies do business. Like one of the ones I remember for a while when we kind of moved, when we were very, very early in .NET Core. So this was like .NET Core 1-2 days.
Yeah.
One of the early adopters was Bing. One thing Bing has is very much like Windows. They have amazing data. Like they know exactly like how much time they spend here, how much time they spend on all of these different parts of kind of their infrastructure. And they were an early adopter of .NET Core because they saw it as a potential for them to like improve performance. And I remember at one point there were a number of features that we had been kind of discussing, like, should we do them in C# or should we not do them in C#? Like module initializers was one of the things that they were kind of big into, and a few other kind of low-level delegate things. And we kind of had, it was this feature we talked about a lot to the point we had kind of a couple of, it was function pointers was the big thing they wanted. They really wanted like function pointers, which is function pointers is something that has existed since CLR 1.0 as like an IL, but we've never exposed it in C#.
Right.
And the conversation had gotten far enough that you could go to the language design repo and you could see people had sketched out like, well, one way we would do it would be like this. Well, it might look like that, it might look like this. Well, the Bing team was so committed. They actually took our compiler, forked it, implemented one of those proposals, pushed it through their code base, and came and did a demo for the .NET team. And they're like, look how much money this saved us. And it was, it's hard to explain. We have been debating doing this for 6 years, 5, 6, like forever. Like this is something it would come up. Should we do it? Nah. Should we do it? Nah. And it literally like 6 years of should we, maybe, should we not, one presentation. Like by the end of the presentation, I didn't even have to poll. I didn't have to look at, I didn't have to look at anyone else in the room. It's like, we're doing the feature. Like we are like that, the amount of money they were able to save because they were like, we did this feature that saves that much performance. That means that much money. And it's like, we're doing that feature. Very clearly we are doing that feature. And it literally like it ended with the guy McCool, who's awesome. Like I grabbed him. We went right to my office afterwards. I talked to them about a couple of different things they'd done. And it literally, it went 6 years of 5, 6 years of conversation over. Like, it's like, that was the decision right now.
Yeah.
It's like, I know we're doing this feature because the numbers were dramatic.
Yeah.
And it turned out that was actually a really good investment by us. And it was really good that Bing pushed us to do those things because function pointers, it's not going to excite the average C# developer.
No.
Like, why do I need another pointer?
I know.
You know who it excites? low-level perf people.
Mm-hmm.
They are like,
Mm-hmm.
we know we can really eke out a lot of performance with this thing, and those are the people that build a lot of the libraries that .NET runs on top of. And it turns out they've been able to do really dramatic performance things with it, much like the Bing team did. And so, yeah, definitely performance like influencing companies and decisions. It's pretty awesome.
Oh, that's cool. Well, we're going to unfortunately leave it there because I'm having a great time. I could talk another hour, but I got to go to band practice. So,
Awesome.
I really enjoyed having you back on the show. You know, one of the things I thought about when you were talking in the beginning was for the next time you come on, which I hope you do, and I think the next time I'd really like to talk more about exactly how you guys build and do quality control and everything with the compiler. I mean, we've talked a lot about it today, but testing. I'd like to pick your brain more exactly how you test things. And I know compilers are different. You know, testing a compiler is different than like testing an application, but I think a lot of people get a lot out of that because I think one of the things that, us normal developers don't know very well is exactly how big companies like you do what you do when it comes to, unit testing and performance testing and things like that. It's kind of like a black box, and a lot of companies don't like to share that either. And so we're kind of left on our own to kind of figure it out. And I think it'd be fascinating to talk to you about that, exactly how you go about structure that, in your team, if you're willing to talk about it. But
I'm more than willing. I'm actually it's a topic that's very near and dear to me because, as I mentioned, like one of my big passions is like infrastructure and reliability and testing scale. And I have worked a lot on both kind of the C# compiler team on like, how do you manage the scale of your testing versus like inherent flakiness in the infrastructure systems all the way. I've also done a lot of the work with the .NET runtime team who kind of have our testing problem on order of magnitude higher than us. And so it's something I'm definitely very passionate about. And I've given lots of mini talks about it internally about like the problems that come with that and the challenges that come with testing at scale.
Yeah.
At the scale we have. Definitely it's something I was always passionate about. And then when I started working with the .NET team and our projects grew to a certain kind of scale and tipping point, it was really interesting. I often tell people like the way I talk about testing today and the way I think about it, Jared from 7 years ago would say like, what, why do you think that way? Like what happened? You used to think like this. It's like scale is the challenges of scale are amazing. Yeah. And so it really pushes you to think differently about that. And so it's definitely something I'm very passionate and eager to talk about.
Yeah. The one question I wanted to make sure I asked you was, so that you were talking about, enabling the preview features. That works in both versions of Visual Studio or just preview?
Just any version of Visual Studio. Yeah. Any version of Visual Studio, you can go to your project file, say langver preview, and then you will start being opted into like the next version of C#. If you start looking at, I think 17.9 is in preview right now. We don't really have anything that you can take advantage of there because we've been cleaning up kind of our .NET 8 release. Yeah. By the time we get to 17.10, at the very least, we'll have param span of T and params collection of T checked in. We will likely have the new locking behavior checked in and a few other things that you can use the preview flag to opt into and see.
Okay, great. Well, like I said, this has been a fascinating, and I wish we could talk longer, but I can't. So, and Simon wants to go to bed anyway. So I blame everything on Simon because it's 12:30 at night there. So, so the last question I ask my guests when they come on the second time is, what brings you joy in your tech career?
I just like one of the great things about being on the C# team is I get to interact with all different facets of the company because they end up, everyone like, we're experiencing a build error. We don't understand why this is working. And so I get these little pieces. I get this little window into all these teams around Microsoft. I get to see what they're doing when they kind of have trouble with C# or .NET, or they come to us with like, hey, we're having these challenges with how we build, AI or how we build this web model. And we feel like if you move C# kind of in this direction, it would like make things easier for us. And so a lot of what gives me joy is just like getting those little nuggets from all these different teams across Microsoft and seeing like, what is the company doing? And also I just, DevDiv, it's a great place to work. I
Mhm.
have a lot of people, like I hit my 20 year, like a lot of the people in the room with me when we were celebrating are either above their 20 or they're, 15 or whatever.
Mhm.
I have a lot of friends at work that I have been working with for 10 plus years now, and a lot of just like great people and great times. It's a very fun environment to go in. You are challenged every day in terms of just like what are the technical things we're doing, but it's also just fun challenges. It's your
Yeah.
friends poking at you about like, you hit that bug the other day, didn't you? So it's just a great environment to work in.
Yeah, that sounds great. It, yeah, I don't know what to say because it just sounds great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I definitely want to have you back on again. I'll hit you up when I'm looking for guests again, and we'll talk about, if you want, we can talk about how you all go about testing the compiler and everything.
Sounds great.
That sounds really fascinating to me. So have a great weekend. Have fun with your kids. I hope when you get down to Disneyland, your kids will love it as much as I do. And have a great weekend.
All right, you too, Dave.
Thank you. Well, that was a great episode, I think, with Jared. Jared it, he really loves his job, and I love talking to people that love their job. And working at a big company like Microsoft can be challenging, and it seems like Jared really loves it there. So that's awesome. I'm very, very happy for him. Okay, I mentioned at the top of the hour that I've been working really hard on updating all my performance for .NET 8. I'm working really, really hard. I've published a bunch of new articles. I have like 30 more waiting to be published. They're just in the queue because I don't want to release 30 articles in one day, so I have them spaced out for the next couple months. So I hope you go to this page, and this is where I feature all of my articles about code performance. And like I said, you will find out some very interesting things about .NET 8 that you probably didn't think of. And so I hope you go to that URL there and check out some of the articles. And if there's an article you want me to write on performance, please let me know, and I'll be happy to do it for you if you explain it well enough for me to understand. I have a new Twitter poll out. Speaking of performance, I was curious, back when we started .NET, if no records came back from like a database call, we would usually throw an exception. In recent history, that has changed, where people like to throw, instead of throwing an exception, which is very expensive, Jared can tell you that, they're returning an empty collection instead. And so I was kind of going all through the different ways of what you can return. And I came up with, you can return an empty collection, you can return default, you can return null, which is also another thing people do, or you can throw exception. And so I'm asking all of you which one you think is most performant. I know which one it is, and I will share that with you, but I'm asking you all which one you think it is. And based on the results right now, the majority is incorrect. So speaking about performance only. And so we'll see. So I hope you go vote for that. Geek humor. Any programmer will understand this. What's a golden rule in programming? If it works, don't touch it. Ship it. Don't ever touch it again, because like we were talking about, one little change can break things, and sometimes in a horrific way. So I thought that was funny. As always, I hope you will help me help the kids in the slums in Delhi, India. They really need our help right now, and those are pictures and video from when I was there last, where we brought them computers, and the kids sang us songs, and we handed out candy and all that fun things. And there's Dave and Shandy, the two people who run the orphanage, and they're total inspiration to me, and they work tirelessly every day to help these kids, get out of the slums and make a life for themselves, just like they were able to do. Because Chandy used to be a rag picker, and I forget what Dave used to do, but they were able to bring themselves out of the slums. I know the story, but and now they're giving it forward, paying it forward, and helping kids. And there's some of the kids there. So please go to voiceofslum.org and donate whatever you can, whatever it is. They need your help, and so I hope you do that today. So in 2 weeks, I'm really excited to have Jody Burchell on. She's a PhD, and I'm really excited. I met her and was very impressed with her when I spoke in Lithuania last year. And so she's going to be coming to us from over the pond, I guess they call it, and on February 17th. So I hope you join us for that. I'm really looking forward to that. Also, please donate blood. All the American blood banks are in a huge shortage right now, and so please just take 45 minutes out of your day and go donate a pint of blood that can help up to 3 humans. And like I said, there's a huge shortage going on right now. So please help your fellow human, because you know what? Someday you might need that help, and you need to bank up that karma, if you ask me. And I got an email the last week or so that all my donations have helped close to 300 people now, and I'm really proud of that. And so hopefully I've banked up a lot of karma. All right. Thank you so much. Make sure you email suggestions, including who you want me to ask to come on the show, to dotNetDave at Live. And with that, I will see you in 2 weeks.